We think that only about 25% of all the silent films still exist. That's for the feature films. How many of this type of motion pictures still exist? It's gotta be probably just a handful.
We recently discovered a 1917 silent film that Underwriters Laboratories had produced with S&A Films in conjunction with the Chicago Fire Department in an effort to share a safety story about factory conditions and what owners of factories need to do to keep their people safe. It had been sitting for decades, and we've now had it restored and scored, and we're about to premiere the film for the first time in almost 100 years.
Underwriters Laboratories was founded out of the electrical inspection work that our founder, William Henry Merrill Jr., conducted as part of the 1893 World's Columbian Exposition in Chicago, initially focusing on electrical and fire safety hazards, but in time that grew to encompass many more safety concerns.
That mission that started back in the late 1800s is that same mission that carries us today. We are still applying and developing codes and standards to make the world a safer place.
Fire was a major public hazard in the early 20th century.
When you think of Chicago, you think of the Great Fire of Chicago, but there was another absolutely tragic fire which occurred 7 years prior to the making of this movie, and that was the Chicago Union Stockyard Fire. 21 Chicago firefighters were killed when a building collapsed on them.
In 1911, the Triangle Shirtwaist Factory fire claimed 146 lives, and in a scene in our movie that seems pulled right out of the real history of that disaster, a number of the young women are unable to escape the building down the stairs because the door is locked.
The core principles still remain the same. Save lives, protect people, protect property, and that's exactly what you saw the Chicago Fire Department do in the film.
The film was made right here in Chicago by S&A Studios, a legendary silent film production company.
S&A is most famous for releasing Chaplin movies, including The Tramp.
The Chicago Fire Department actually used real firefighters and their own gear and equipment to portray the fire department. This is also a fascinating picture to see both a combination of horse-drawn and motorized fire engine parade down the streets of Chicago.
This film was shown across the US and Canada in the early 1920s.
It was a silent film, so it was never rerun, and it just disappeared. Somehow it ended up at the University of Maryland until one day it was rediscovered on the shelves by Mark Colburn. And he recognized right away that this is something precious and important. And thank gosh he did, because another few years, who knows if we would have ever been able to scan it.
This film came to the Preservation Department in 2024. When the film came to us, it was in pieces. It came in this tin can on a wooden reel and had a very distinct odor that did not evoke nitrate, so it looked very odd. We knew we had something completely different, but since we don't have experience with 28mm film, we had to go look for help.
I immediately thought of Dino Everett at USC because he's one of the world's leading experts in obscure formats of film.
One of the things that made motion picture film a reality was coming up with a flexible plastic base. The first version of that was nitrocellulose, but the drawback was that it was highly flammable. So you can't put it out. You could actually toss a reel of nitrate that's burning into the ocean, take it back out, and it's gonna still be burning. Pathé in 1912 went steadfast with a formula for a safety film format, which is what we call diacetate. Although it would have been shot on nitrate, An Unbeliever Convinced was transferred over to the 28mm safety film, which made it more accessible in a safe environment.
It was actually very intentional that Underwriters Laboratories made this film on 28mm safety film because of its fire-resistant properties. Being so concerned with fire safety, we didn't want to release a film that was highly flammable.
When I'm restoring a movie, it all comes down to condition of that movie. In the case of Unbeliever Convinced, there was the material that was very warped, but not completely brittle, so I was able to scan it. Then there was an in-between batch of film that was brittle. I have this technique where I encase the film in tape, and that allows me to run it through the scanner. And then a lot of the tinted sections, they were already broken into small little shards about this big. We had to tape them up and rebuild them like a puzzle. Once everything's scanned, then is stabilization. And then the final step is using digital tools to clean it up. The film is in the 90 to 95% saved range.
Silent films weren't meant to be watched silent, they were meant to be accompanied by music.
We were able to get John Marsalis involved to make a score because he's one of the most gifted silent film composers and performers around today.
Music gives emotional power to films, and so there was always some kind of musical score, and it's really critical to make that a part of the film viewing experience.
It has an authenticity that is so wonderful because he added in musical elements that sound like sound effects, and that's exactly what you would have had in an early movie theater.
I think the film is important for a couple of reasons. It's part of our UL history. It's part of Chicago Fire Department's history. It's part of Chicago's history and the history of filmmaking.
Over the last 100 years, we have tried to be a big part of bringing the fire service from those early days to today, leveraging research and science. The fire service is constantly risking their lives and putting themselves out there to keep people safe. Who's looking out for them? Well, we are, so that they can be the most effective at their jobs and save lives out on the streets.